Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local. All right, so speaking of sophisticated, I'm trying to come up with a segue here. Sophisticated technology and location. You've had an
This seems like a very unsophisticated solution to me, but yes, the underlying technology would be sophisticated. Yes.
You've gotten access to Google's new AI enhanced version of Maps, and what have you've been using it quite a bit, and what have you been experiencing?
So, firstly, I would question the adjective enhanced. At this point, it is significantly
diminished. Google's diminished version of Maps.
It is significantly less capable than basic Google search. The first issue is it takes 3 to 5 seconds for it to load in Maps, and it takes 5 to 7 seconds to give you an answer. So you're talking 12 seconds in before you can see their answer, whereas the same query in Maps is not measurable beyond a second or two. I don't really know. I haven't timed it, but it seems instant. Then when you do load a question in, a lot of questions, they say this query isn't supported yet, but we're actively working to improve the experience. Try with Google Maps search, right? So a lot of queries fall into this unsupported realm. The kinds of queries that make all kinds of sense to me as a rural resident, I might want to look, for example, I did a query the other day where I wanted to look for the best custom jewelry designer within 80 miles of where I live. In other words, frequently living rurally, we have to go to Buffalo to find sophisticated things or more sophisticated things. And it gave me 6 jewelers in Olean, half of whom don't do sophisticated design work. I said, look further. Went out to the next towns over and gave me 2 more. And I said, no, look further. Then it gave me 3 in Buffalo. And I said, compare all those. And it said, we can't, right? So my desire for expanding the radius on the query because it served me as a rural searcher was totally frustrated by a long, tedious back and forth where I got nowhere. So it, to some extent, it's non-compliant. It doesn't do what you ask it, right? I mean, you can understand when you give a request to ChatGPT and it gives you lies, but at least it's trying, right? This, it isn't even close. And so one of the big impediments is its inability to sort of move beyond the constraints of Google Maps ranking and give you sort of a broader ranking comparison, right? They don't have any of that data. The other thing that happens on these, searches aren't supported. I know if you remember in my article, I wrote about upscale nouveau meals in Buffalo where it said not supported, but when I went to New York City, it showed as supported. So clearly there was language they're using that's within the New York corpus that allows them to parse meals. But when I switched the word meals to restaurants, upscale nouveau restaurants in Buffalo that were less than $50 a person, it gave me an answer, which is very interesting that it has such a limited view of language and constructs. So and then finally, it doesn't understand.
Not supposed. What? I mean, these AI tools are supposed to be more expansive in understanding language than just exactly verbatim,
And so it doesn't even understand this broader context within the language within Maps. But then when you start looking at things like weather, like there is no snow this weekend, so where can an outdoor enthusiast go to get a nice outdoor experience? I have friends coming this weekend, and it shows me children's parks nearby. I mean,
you didn't specify the ages of your friends.
Well, but I did specify outdoor enthusiasts, right? Well, an outdoor enthusiast is hardly going to be attracted to the Oak Hill Park around the corner from me. So it's non-compliant in a very odd ways, both limited by broader language understanding, limited by not understanding external context. Potential is huge. Implementation so far is hardly a fraction of what Maps does.
In your piece, you included a bunch of screenshots, Mike. But let me ask you about the user experience, because does when you enter the query, does it obscure Google Map results normally, or are you getting a set of Google Map results in addition to the SGE like presentation? Or is this the sort of
You get a
default that you, yeah,
Yeah, so it takes up more of the screen, but it does leave the map at the top, so you see locations on the map. You get a spread out view, they're more card like of the locations that it's identified, a more card like view, so it's spread out. You have to scroll through them, so they're not instantly viewable in a list. You have to sort of scroll through them. And then at the bottom of the list, they have a carousel of third party links that you might find valuable. So the interface is more SGE like interface, right? It seems to be bolted on rather than a map unique interface integrated really well into maps. I mean, clearly this is very early tests. They're obviously trying to figure out what people are even going to ask so that they can build the data to support that. But it's not clear as a rural, my example between Buffalo and New York makes me fear that as a rural user, it's never going to serve my needs because there won't be enough queries for them to build a model around it. Whereas maybe it'll serve urban needs. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean that's very typical of Google's product development from the start of the company is and tech more generally is just they only consider the urban or suburban experiences, and rural is the sort of 10% of the long tail, and we'll get to it if we get to it. So
Right. So color me disappointed at this point, but still intrigued. How's that?
yeah. So just as a kind of a last note, today this will be in the newsletter. There was a report yesterday or recently, I should say, depending on when you're watching this or listening to this, that OpenAI is going to build a search engine to more directly compete with Google. With some assistance from Bing, Microsoft, it already has access to Bing and can do web searches. Although it doesn't present results in a traditional web search way, it does give you links, and so that's pretty interesting. I mean, I find myself using ChatGPT more and more and more for personal things and for work things, and in contrast to your experience, Mike, not for local, I don't use it for local, but in contrast to your experience, Mike, about the sort of conversational dimension, which was frustrating, I continue to be really impressed by the conversational interaction with ChatGPT. I was using it on a spreadsheet and it didn't get the answer right. And I said, no, this is not what I want. I want this. Do you understand what I want? And then it repeats back to me, yes, you want these things. And I'm able to sort of refine it and get results that I want. And it's just a very different experience. And for the most part, it's a pretty positive experience in general. And I
Right.
think that there are a lot of query environments where, at least at the top of the funnel, where that kind of back and forth is really valuable to help people refine. I mean, we talked about faceted search with Google's online demo to help people refine what they're looking for if they don't know all the things to ask. So there is an opportunity here, but we'll see if Google can realize it. Maybe not so much in maps, because in maps you're really kind of closer typically to the bottom of the funnel. It's like, give me a best Indian restaurant, Target store hours, that kind of stuff. So it may be a different scenario in
but
maps.
quickly on the
I
go
did
ahead,
a
Mike.
search. I don't. Do you guys know what a sugar shack is? It's a regional restaurant
No.
where they make their own maple syrup. So again, friends coming this weekend, I asked it, are there any sugar shacks open this weekend? And it could not answer. And I went into Google Maps and literally answered it instantly. So it's worse than just not a fulfilling conversation. It doesn't deliver at all in some situations the kind of long tail stuff that regionally is very important, but maybe obviously Google AI does not know what a sugar shack is yet, but Google Maps does. So that's interesting.
On the ChatGPT search engine front, I think one advantage that ChatGPT has that none of these other competitors do is it's built a consumer brand already, and I think
Yeah.
that's a big part of the sort of fundamental building blocks of actually changing someone's habit from using Google is having a brand. And
Yep.
the fact that they have it, I actually think puts them in a much better position, even than Bing. Nobody's going to use Bing. It's not a real brand. ChatGPT has captured people's imagination, and I think that there's going to be more likelihood of like, okay, like this actually is something that I use ChatGPT for because I know that it's really good at having these conversations.
And
There
it's
was a
fun. It's not painful. You
yeah.
think of it as a fun interaction, whereas this, for me on maps, was a painful
Well,
interaction,
that's
both in and of
I
itself
think
and in comparison to the real maps.
I think that's a critical point, Mike, because I think your level of disappointment and frustration is very different when you do a search or do some sort of question or query on ChatGPT and there's an error or it doesn't work. You're more forgiving of it than you are of Google, which you expect to work. I mean, even though we have these expectations of spam, I still find myself really frustrated when I can't get, I'm doing a lot of searches for content that I know exists, articles I've seen, data I've seen, that I know exists, and I'm having trouble finding it on Google. And it's incredibly frustrating to me when that happens. And so I think there's different, at least at this stage, there's a different set of consumer expectations which advantage ChatGPT because people be more forgiving of it. And one sort of final note before we go, another interesting point about the search possibility for ChatGPT is that it opens the door potentially to advertising for them, search advertising for them. There was an article in the Financial Times that was talking about how they're trying to double their run rate by 2025, and can they do it with enterprise customers? This would represent another monetization scenario for them, so that may be part of their motivation in trying to develop a search engine.
I mean, they have a successful subscription model, which Google has struggled with, made some progress with. But I would much prefer a subscription model because it doesn't create the conflicts of a two-sided market, where first they do really good for the consumers, and they have to do
Right.
well for the advertisers. Then they screw everybody. Which is what went on with Yelp.
I agree.
And Google, and so I would just assume it be subscription if that's what it's going to take these days going forward.
Well, and it's very interesting that Neva, the sort of first AI powered search engine that kind of came onto the scene, started by a former Google executive, was not able to make that subscription model fly. They said they couldn't make it fly, in part to your point, David, because they couldn't get people to switch to even try it in the first place, which is the consumer brand point.
Right. But they didn't have that friendly hook that ChatGPT had. I mean, ChatGPT is an experience, right? And it was positioned as an experience. It was quite a brilliant rollout, and it was quirky enough and is still quirky enough, like that you can use words that both Bing and Google stop you from using, which I find fun also.
Well, and I think it's a very different position in terms of, you guys have both been saying a flavor of this already, but like search for ChatGPT is a feature. It's not the end all be all reason for using it. Exactly. Right. And so that, to me, if I were Google, I'd be much more worried about that than Bing incorporating ChatGPT, where it's just, you still have to have this thing in mind. ChatGPT, it could be you're just sort of walking around your living room and talking to it, and it gives you answers, right? I mean, it's like, well, that's just one of the many things that it can do. So
that's exactly right, because you're going to be using ChatGPT to do your data analysis or your content outline or whatever you're using it for, and then you have some sort of additional thing that you need. You need some data point, you need some piece of information. You're going to search for it there, so you don't have to leave. You're not necessarily going to go to Google and come back to ChatGPT. So on that note, we will end another exciting episode of the Near Memo. And as always, we appreciate you listening and viewing, and tell your friends, and keep listening. Come back next time.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.